Clarity on this proposal?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. The full intention of the next item is to table it. But we're going to talk about it first, just like we did the last one. I think that's ironic. Anyways, we're going to talk compatibility. Let me move forward in my notes here. The hiding of rows has made the page numbers completely foreign to me. All right. Top or bottom of page 20. 23.2 compatibility. So this is the first of the compatibility items I have here. I want to start broadly with this topic before we start taking up specifics of it. And so if the first one is not a broad motion, then I would like to move to one that is more broad. So Commissioner Kenny, yours is 23.2, but I'm going to read it off here and see if it's one we're going to stick with as far as the high level conversation. It talks about alleyways being triggering. So this is more of a very specific item. Same with the next one from Commissioner Anderson, width of the alley. Moving to the next page, top of page 21. Commissioner Shaw, 23.171. And I believe yours is in combination probably with Commissioner Knuckles. If that's, I don't see Commissioner Knuckles with us at the moment. But I want you to know that on 23.171 for you, you had multiple compatibility ones that were all just basically taking the different sections of the code for the different tables. I mashed them all together. So they've been removed beyond this. I consolidated. There's an item I did consolidate. So with that being said, are you wanting to take up Commissioner Knuckles' broad motion? Because I know that you were in that.
Yeah, I'll kind of lead that discussion.
Okay, go for it. So,
but you want to.
I need to make sure there's a second to this motion. So I think the basis of the motion, correct me if I'm wrong then, is on. It would be the following one from Commissioner Shaw's on A23.211.1 in green, basically almost in the middle of page 21. And this references Commissioner Knuckles' compatibility exhibits. And there's, specific heights are mentioned, specific distance are mentioned with setbacks and with density bonuses and such. So
Can I say one thing?
You can say one thing, then I need to find your second.
Okay, this is.
Microphone, yeah.
This is the combination PC ZAP kind of negotiated compatibility idea that was formulated. So that's what this is.
Okay. And before I find is there a second to this? Okay, second by Commissioner White. I need to add some clarification to this as the backup information and some emails surrounding where, how this motion or how this language originated. I need to make sure everybody's clear on. Planning Commission never authorized a working group. I was asked by other fellow land use commissioners, council member staff. There was 4 or 5 of us at different times. 2 commissioners from ZAP, council member aide helping the conversation, a member of the public. And we never asked for a compatibility working group, so I don't want there to be the assumption that there was a working group, even though sometimes the language in here is saying the working group. There was never a working group, and I'm pretty sure ZAP did not authorize a working group either, because we have very specific rules as to what is a working group and what is not. This was a group of people coming together to find a compromise within that group of people. So I just want people to understand that as a baseline, so that they don't go, wait a minute, there was a working group and I was not a part of it. It's because there was not a working group.
Should we call you a super team instead?
I mean, I like the super part. I mean, it's kind of cool. Anyways, so that's what it is. This was a second by Commissioner White. Is there opposition to this motion? Okay, there is opposition to this motion. Commissioner Shaw, if you want to go into detail.
Yeah, I need
the exhibits up on the screen. This is visual.
So you can either, it's either under my name, under Shaw, item 1,
Or
pages 7 and 8,
Or it could be under Knuckles, too.
or it could be under Knuckles. I did have one massing exhibit. So these might have been exhibits from the previous meeting. I don't know if they were moved forward under this meeting.
Chair Commissioner Liaison Andrew Rivera. Commissioner, what's that from May 16th?
It had been from our last meeting or the meeting before that.
I think it was the last meeting we had.
Yeah, all those exhibits we've sent you guys before, they did not go away. And let's hang tight on the visuals on this because
Okay.
compatibility is all about visuals.
I can lend mine.
So it's the May 14th, and it's Knuckles.
Thank you, Commissioner Thompson. And he had 3 exhibits in that conversation, by the way.
Boy, we actually had, okay. What else is on there?
That's sheet 1 of 2.
I think that's an older version, so we can go with this, though.
Well,
There should,
go back to the previous slide. Yeah, I mean, it's just in draft form.
You want the color one, right?
there,
Director Guernsey, did you have that paper? Do you want to show it to Commissioner Shaw? Maybe that.
so there is a Shaw item 1 on the 14th or the 16th. If we can find that one, it has everything we need.
There you go.
There you go.
All right, Commissioner Shaw, you got your 3 minutes.
So the visual there is kind of the most important thing. So what was worked out is after looking at current code, the code next current version, is that proposal. Also, the group had looked at the East Riverside corridor compatibility standards. So in looking at all that and doing quite a bit of comparing, the group came up with this idea for negotiated compatibility, which changes it standardizes, reduces from the 10 pages in the current code to just 2 pages for this idea. The compatibility setback is made 25 feet in the rear and the side for all zones that trigger compatibility to make it easy. And for most zones, the 45 foot height, you see that consistently going up to 100 feet. So that step back height of 45 feet pretty consistently through most of the compatibility standards extends all the way to 100 feet. The other notable thing through all the standards is trying to observe where the 60-foot height is the distance for the 60-foot height. In current code, you have a 60-foot height at 300 feet. Code next has 60 foot at 100 feet. The ZAP proposal has 60 foot at 200 feet. And this group, their proposal is to have, as you see here, is 60 foot at 150 feet. And just bringing in East Riverside had 60 feet wasn't allowed until 100 feet. And so those comparisons are shown. If we can go to the next, go 2 pages down. Go down to the higher numbers. I'm sorry. 8, 9. Keep going, one more. So this is kind of the comparison. You can see the different codes and kind of the different breakpoints. And so what I'll just offer here is this is a negotiation kind of between current code. It definitely pulls everything in closer. And so I feel it's a good compromise. The one thing I would, it also brings in some density bonuses at the 150 foot, which is good, and also at the 225 foot level. So you go to full height at 300 feet is the idea on this working group proposal.
Okay. In opposition, 3 minutes. Commissioner Kenny?
So there are a number of things wrong with this. Could I pull that exhibit up? The first is that according to a presentation by the ZAP chair a while back, compatibility is, I got a quote here, about preserving sunshine, privacy, and character. And you'll notice that there's a drawing of a legal single-family house there. This compatibility restricts, for impact, everything other than single-family homes that would be hidden behind a legal single-family home built next to you. What in the world are we protecting there if those things would literally be hidden behind? And you might say, well, this is not for adjacent properties. Well, the working group compromise that has been worked out does not mention adjacency. And I believe this is a very particular reason because I believe that this proposal is a trap. They couldn't agree on adjacency. This was something that was worked out. What did the other party to this compromise do? They passed a resolution saying that we should kill code next. So people were negotiating with another party who then punted. If we were to pass something like this, there's no reason to have a 300-foot compatibility zone if it's not meant for non-adjacent properties. How many properties in town have 300 or 200 or 250 feet of parking lot before there's all of a sudden a high-rise that's over 85 feet that you would want to have compatibility on? It's a very, very rare instances, and this is not what this is designed for. This is designed for non-adjacent properties, which is why adjacency is not written on this sheet, because they couldn't agree to it. So if we pass this, it then goes to council, and the compromise is, okay, well, let's also add non-adjacency. And all of a sudden, we have corridors that are not able to be built over maybe 55 feet, maybe 65 feet if you have affordable housing. This is a trap, and I don't think we should walk into it, first of all. Second of all, it protects homes and people standing in their yards from multifamily buildings more than it protects them from single-family buildings. Where is the equity in that? And finally, as you get further away from a building, it should impact you less, not more. This bends the curve down as you get further away. That makes absolutely no sense. If we're establishing a line of sight, then as something is further away from you, it has less impact, and it should be curving up, as I believe our current compatibility does. So not only does this proposal not make any sense to me, it's not equitable, but it's also a trap that I don't believe we should fall into. I think that, and I think many of us know that there have been council members who have been working very actively on developing a compatibility compromise. They are very advanced in their negotiations. I am personally advocating that we not touch compatibility and we let council do what they're going to do and not, because they're going to do it, and not influence the negotiations in a way that we have no idea how our input will be interpreted.
In favor. Commissioner White.
So Commissioner Kenny hit on a lot of different things that I'd like to respond to. The first one, in his exhibit of the single-family home within that 25 to 50 foot range being limited to 25 feet, I think that would be a valid amendment that we should consider as a commission, because I do see the merits in not penalizing multifamily or another use more than what the single family is already allowed to. And I saw that in the ZAP recommendation, they also bumped that up higher than the 25 to 30. Maybe there's a conversation to be had about that first piece there. In terms of a trap, I think that we have been told time and time again from all different sides of the conversation that we're going to map so that compatibility makes sense. Compatibility is not mapping. Compatibility doesn't fix transitions. Compatibility just protects for the areas where we haven't laid down a transition yet, or we haven't gotten to that piece yet. So instead of viewing this as a trap, I would view this more as a safety lever that doesn't necessarily get pulled all the time, because through proper mapping and through proper conversations about where things happen when, we're relying more on our actual zoning so that you don't have a single family home right up against a super intense use or building. So I understand the concerns about adjacency and non-adjacency, and I understand the difficulty that the super team had in coming to a conversation there, but I think that could be a separate motion outside of the motion that we have before us right now. And maybe that's enough to give council a little bit more input than just not weighing in, because then aren't we just as bad as the other party that didn't weigh in on the table?
All right. In opposition, Commissioner McGraw, and then I'll get you for the last opposition, Commissioner Shea.
Yeah, and I have an exhibit that is not in your backup that I'd like to put on the screen. It's just one page that says compatibility, and I just want to sort of remind us, that's probably it, that the reason we have compatibility standards is that in the 80s we had a lot of property where we would have multifamily and office next to houses with a 60-foot height limit. And there really was nothing to mitigate that situation. So the city came up with the interim, an interim ordinance, and then in the 85 code we got the compatibility standards that we have today. And so the thought was, if we were zoning things to be compatible, we would not need this sort of Band-Aid. And the exhibit, it's just one page with, I hope you can find it. It's just a piece of paper. There you go. So it made me think about the fact that when we started all of this long ago, the idea of the transects was really a progression of density, which also included a progression of height, which makes a lot of sense if you're really zoning the city that way. Compatibility is not such a big deal because it's sort of built in or baked in, however we're saying that. So what I'm seeing is, and especially with these bonuses, is that we're actually sort of violating that concept. And I just want us to be aware of what we're doing, because I think we're not following the transect idea. And of course, in a built city, it's difficult to map the whole city to be compatible. We probably still need some sort of a Band-Aid, but now what we're talking about is with density bonus but then you can just break through that with density bonuses, because we think it'll make affordable housing, and I still have a lot of reservations about that. So I think what we have today works well. I've seen it work, and I appreciate people's work. I think the problem I'm having is that to get your city zoned appropriately and then say, oh, but some people get more, is where I have sort of some heartburn. So I just wanted us to be aware of this before we move forward.
In favor of this motion? Okay. Commissioner Seeger?
I favor the motion and the proposal before us because I do believe that as a commission we need to make recommendations on all major subject areas. And I think the council is probably studying many more than that we know of. There are little work groups. And if we punt compatibility to council, I don't think that we're doing our job. I don't think that our other recommendations that bring in some type of compatibility are not going to be as solid if we don't have a compatibility recommendation. And looking at all of the recommendations out there, and there were quite a few, I think that the one that this super group came up with is probably the best compromise that we have out there as far as looking in that transition zone, because between single family and the density that we need to really reach our affordability goals. If density equals affordability, I'm going to support the recommendation that this group brought forward.
Okay. Commissioner Shea? What's up? Microphone.
Just to clarify, if we do not approve an amendment and we were to approve Code Next as a whole, we would be approving the draft 3 version of compatibility, correct?
That's right. Okay. Well, we'd be taking no action on it. If we're unable to, we have motions that are happening here. So if we don't have we may not be able to have a motion then in support of the current draft 3 compatibility either.
Is it not our intent to take a vote on the entire draft as amended at the end of this discussion?
We are going to take a vote on all of our actions, big and small. And if one of our actions is an inability to go positively or negatively on a topic, then that's the action itself.
So if we are silent, we are not necessarily endorsing D3?
That's true. But we're not going to do one that's of the whole thing that way. It could be on a specific item that we are silent on because maybe the broad recommendations don't specifically address that, but the broad recommendations are in essence would be covering it. In the case of like this, if we have a failing motion on it, that doesn't mean that it's in support of draft 3. So to be clear, Commissioner Shea, you're in opposition.
So in looking at the heights along this, and also in consideration of if what we're trying to do is give a clear message to council about our intent on compatibility, right? Doing nothing doesn't help, and if council, like, as we pointed out, they're doing what they're going to do, then we should still give somewhat of a message of what our intent is. So with that, I'd like to make a substitute motion. So first I would like to bump that first, the 25 to 50, bump that up to be 32 feet. So there's no reason to be penalizing that piece of property right next to the single family. So I would propose to bump that up to 32 feet and move the 85 foot starting for the density bonus starting at the 150 foot. Because I agree with Commissioner.
Can we get the exhibit on the screen?
Yeah, we need the visual on this, please. And
I agree with, as Commissioner Kenny was talking about. There's a visual line that we're drawing, and once,
not that one. Go back to the original one from Commissioner Shaw.
And so
looking at the bottom,
things lower in areas that you can't even see doesn't make sense. So at least this gives us the message that if we're looking at line of sight, what is really compatible is, if it's hidden from view, it's hidden from view. So why are we really penalizing that? So how council wants to move forward from there, they can decide. But at least we give a clear message. Next to the properties, we can bump up the height so you're not penalizing more than a single family. And also this line of sight thing of being hidden from other properties, we could bump it up to the point because it doesn't affect them anyway.
So
is the affordable housing density bonus, so is it 4 floors then, as shown sitting on top of the 150 foot?
Sorry, I'm looking at it differently. But I mean, the 85 foot would be bumped to the 150.
That's right. So if you slide those top two there's
That's
two
correct.
fours,
That's correct. That would slide over, and the 25 would be raised to
32.
32.
Okay, all right, I understand that. Is there a second to the substitute
I have
motion?
a potentially friendly amendment.
Let me get
Has
a.
to occur before the second.
All right, so we got a second. Go ahead.
Okay, which is, what if we just use the McMansion standard that you've proposed and say, which is basically 17 feet at the lot line and then increasing 1 for 1 foot at a 45-degree angle for a certain distance. That's the same line of sight.
My concern is that we're mixing up, like, because that's applied to the residential product, and I don't want to mix that use, I guess. I mean, I'm trying to keep it as simple.
Remember, fire trucks are often needed to the rear of these as well. So there's a different aspect to what happens in the rear of a property on multifamily versus commercial.
So
or multifamily
I don't want to
residential.
I don't want to convolute that at this point. I know what you're saying to maybe further create that angle, but bumping the height up to the 32 feet should be doing similar of that, because right now we said 35 feet to the total top, but as we get to this product, if it's a flat roof, then we get to the point where it's more 32 feet would be would work with what is equivalent to like a flat roof. 35 foot if you're doing a pitch, right? So that's why I'm doing a 32.
Okay, so it was not accepted. The friendly is not accepted by the motion maker.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Can I ask the motion maker to restate the motion?
I'll restate the motion if that's okay. 25 feet to 32 feet for this the distance between 25 and 50 feet, as shown in the bottom image, and then at 150 feet, you have 85 feet in height, not 65 feet in height, as shown. And then everything above 45 feet would be the density bonus area. Okay. Is there any other differences in the motion? Okay, thank you. And that's clear to our second. All right. Is there opposition to the substitute? Commissioner Hart.
Yeah, I think this still doesn't quite address my concerns of my opposition to the original motion. So Opticos came in October or thereabouts and told us that compatibility is the biggest limiter to capacity in our current code, and especially if we want to go with density along the corridors. I see Code Next Draft 3 as the compromise in and of itself. So I don't understand the need to have additional compromise here in terms of what we're building on the corridors. And I agree with a lot of the points that you brought up, Commissioner White, that the transitions are the way that we should really be addressing this. But in the absence of having talked about those transitions or mapped those transitions, it's hard to support something that's going to limit the densification of the corridors for me.
Okay. In favor of the substitute motion, is that Commissioner White?
I don't know if I'm in favor, but
No. If you're in neutral, then I'm going to hold you back on speaking in favor.
I guess then you should hold me back on
Okay.
neutral.
All right. In favor of the substitute motion, Commissioner Kazi.
So I understand that I support the motion because it addresses the line of sight issue. And then I understand that we want to map such that compatibility is not required. And I also understand Commissioner White's comment about protections. But I think the line of sight is the protection, so I'll be supporting this motion.
Okay. In opposition? Then
I'm
if
sorry,
you
can I
want,
hear the line of sight? Is there a line of sight text aspect to this?
no, but talking about what you were bringing up in the beginning about the line of sight issues, he sees that as in tune with line of sight. So in opposition, Commissioner McGraw.
Well, I mean, this is it's basically one lot from single-family homes, and it's going to 85 feet. And I'm not sure where the line of sight standard came from, but I just don't think that's, and I also don't think that when you make a taller building, you necessarily can make it more affordable. That seems a little bit odd. And I would also be interested in I believe when our consultants came, and people on the mapping group were pulling all these levers, they were saying that changing current compatibility did not make a dramatic difference. That's what I recall. So maybe somebody else can recall that better than I can, but I thought that they did not have such a tremendous impact on capacity.
And we've got staff here to answer the compatibility lever part of the question, I think.
I think I'd like to invite Lorelei from ECO address the issue of heights and affordability, about allowing some of the taller buildings.
I think it was specific to compatibility.
Yeah, because it was one of our levers, and there was definitely questions back and forth.
As I understand the motion, right now there are some density bonuses that would be lost at the 100-foot level, and as well as capacity that's being suggested, I think, by the proposal.
Between the Code Next proposal and the substitute motion. That's
and
correct.
The substitute. Yes.
So we attempted to draw out what we think the amendment is so that we can make sure that we're all on the same page. I was going to put that up there. But your question about taller buildings being more affordable, I think the working group proposal includes a density bonus, which would require affordability in the bonus area. So those taller buildings, if they were built, would have to have affordable units in them.
All right, so we're pulling up an image to clarify that this is exactly what we're talking about.
Can I make a real quick comment?
That is not what we're talking about.
Good. I'm glad we put it up there then.
Because the portion that Commissioner Shea's motion stated did not talk about anything between 50 and 150 feet. It only spoke to, except for the 32-foot aspect.
Right.
Well, that's not within 50 and 150, never mind. Between 50 and 150, there was no modification to the proposal that's at the bottom of this page. Though I could see where there could be a line of sight modification within that space too, if we want to talk about a 55-foot or something. But anyways, that's a different story. So questions for staff while we got staff at the table. I want to make sure we're answering the initial question from Commissioner McGraw, which is impact, the impact of compatibility that was discussed in the mapping working group. And when we were turning that lever on and off, its relevance to this conversation right now is...
I did not personally participate in those conversations, so I'm sorry that I can't personally answer them, but I'm guessing there's somebody in the room who could.
I'm pulling it up right now on my...
Okay, thank you. And I know this was an item that several of us kind of scratch our heads on, like, is this right? Is this not right? Are we correctly trying to... Is the modeling correctly take compatibility into account or not? So that was often a point of contention. Commissioner Shaw.
So where are we in this? Are we opposed?
So we're at 2 and 2 in favor and against the substitute motion.
Okay. So for the substitute motion, can I ask a clarifying question?
Absolutely.
So I wanted. Staff's recommended Code Next version 3 is on adjacency. This, to be totally transparent, Mr. Kinney, it was not based on adjacency. I failed to bring that up. It is based on the current code idea that anything within the distance, the impacted distance, would be affected. So that is the premise of this. So I need to ask the substitute motion maker, did they plan to base this on adjacency, or anything within the impacted distance would be limited in height?
Does adjacency trigger it or not? Does non-adjacency trigger it?
Non-adjacency does, it's anything.
Okay.
The way I see it right now is like whether it's adjacent or not doesn't matter, because we got to map it correctly. Right? We're assuming a lot of times that, it's not mapped correctly, so property right behind a commercial is going to impact that. But we still have to map it correctly. Ideally, we don't need to mess with this because we're going to map it right. But if the issue isn't, if it's not mapped correctly, this comes in.
All right, so you're saying it's not about the adjacent property. It's just there everywhere being triggered. It's a triggering point that comes from all single-family residential, and it doesn't matter if they're next to the commercial property or not.
Yes.
Okay.
And I have a
And just a second
where do
understanding.
you get to go to full height? Is it still 300?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Step question.
All right, so the motion maker and the second are both okay, or are understanding that that is the intent of the motion. So it's all properties, it's not the adjacent property.
A question for staff.
Question for staff, go for it.
What portion of Imagine Austin corridors, ballpark, roughly, would be limited to no higher than 85 feet under this proposal? Are there any outside of downtown that are more than 300 feet away from a residential property?
There are some areas, like North Cross Mall, stuff like that, where you get into some wide corridor situations.
Yeah, it's difficult for me just to talk off the top of my head when you talk about the entire city. But there are corridors that are certainly narrower.
Okay, if you might have a graphic that you could pull up as part of this conversation, and that would be the 300-foot deep parcel map that you sent to the commission before.
I think we had one that was 150. I don't know if we had one that was
Sure,
300.
but it helps to understand where the deep properties are, because then.
Let me see how I might access that.
Thank you.
May I ask just a clarification?
Yes.
Of the commission. So the suggestion is that an R zone would trigger compatibility no matter where it is, and that the impact of that R property, I guess 1, 2, 3, or 4, would be that you're saying that it would go a distance of 300 feet from that R zone property.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes.
On this motion?
Yes, it is, yeah, the impact of it stops at 300 feet. How'd you get out there, Commissioner White?
The slide from the working group that talks about compatibility. If you want to pull that up.
Chair, while it's being pulled up, can I ask a question for clarification?
Yes.
Are we voting on this, or is this? Did you start by saying it might be tabled?
I've set the expectation this could very well be tabled to take it up with the mapping conversations, because there's triggering points from, like, what if RM does not trigger compatibility? That's its own question, and it needs to be a little bit more understood, I believe. Also, while this is being pulled up, I'd like a moment of time to kind of, as being the person who is in the room as in the crafting of this from day one to the finish line. This motion was taken up as the byproduct of that group's hours and hours of efforts. Am I 100% in support of this? I'm not. It was a compromise. It was to get into agreement with another group of people who often I'm not in agreement with. And I wanted to find a moment in this process where could we reach a middle point? Could I pull them in a direction, they pull me in a direction, and we find that there's a balance? Do I like every part of this? I don't. Did I give up some things I really didn't want to give up? I did. And there's things I would change in a heartbeat if it was just me walking out of that room by myself. I walked out of that room believing I had a compromise with a group of people. That motion was never taken back up by anybody else. That is incredibly frustrating. But it's the nature of what happened. PC was left alone with this, and no one else discussed it. So here we are today with that motion. I do think we should discuss it. I think it has merits to the conversation. Are there things that I would change starting over? I would. But I just want you guys to know that I have my own frustrations with this, but there are parts in this that I do believe in too.
Chair Oliver,
Yeah.
One point you brought up, and I think might aid in the discussion, I think, and correct me, that you said lots 225 deep or less don't lend themselves to more than 3 stories. Is that an accurate statement? Because
Shallow lots, because they cannot fit a parking structure on them, are really an above grade parking structure on them, are difficult to go more than 45 feet tall. And so, yeah, downtown you can do it. You can go subgrade parking. If the assumption is subgrade parking on North Burnett, way south of Mar, that's not a good assumption in today's market. Most of the lots on our corridors are pretty darn shallow. This won't even apply because they cannot. That's the thing is like, where are we having a fight about properties that can go 85 feet and where they can't go 85 feet? If the assumption is let's do this so that we can get 85 feet on a lot that's 150 feet deep, you're not talking about a lot of Austin. There's only certain pieces of Austin that you can afford to do subgrade parking to make that work. Or if there's no parking and the market supports no parking there, and there's not a lot of Austin that supports no parking at all, then yeah, maybe it's possible too. But the part of our overall dynamic was 225-foot deep lots. That's once you're there, on a 225 deep lot, you could have a 65-foot tall building, which is why the 150 feet deep was a big deal. So at 150 feet, you could get 65. But this proposal shows that, but it's only in the density bonus portion. And I used up way too much time.
So just real quick, this is what came out of that mapping group, looking at the different levers, turning them on and off. And so I would say that both commissioners' memory of the topic is correct. It has a very little change in terms of nearest equivalency. This information is before D3. So whether you have compatibility or not has a pretty small change. When you look at specific levers that go much further, like the levers that we were looking at in the mapping group, I don't think are even recommendations that have come forward because they were so far in terms of height. When you go that far with height, then compatibility makes a big difference because you've said you could have this much, and then compatibility pulls it back down. If you say you can have this much, then the delta of compatibility makes much less of a difference. The other item that staff is going to pull up is the map of the lot depths, which I think will help with that last piece of conversation.
Can we read the
Couple
last
questions
bullet
for
on there
Commissioner
also? It says, when combined with other priorities, such as 1, 3, or 4, the impact of this priority is much more pronounced. So,
Which is what I was talking about. Those priorities that we put in there that increase the height by a ton. I mean, it's just this. If this is your height, if you say your height can be this, then your compatibility makes a difference. If you say your height can be this, then your compatibility doesn't make that big of a difference.
Commissioner White, was that F25 compatibility or D3 compatibility?
It was Title 23.
So that's D3 compatibility. Turning that off doesn't have a big impact, but the compatibility that we're considering today is much more impactful than D3 compatibility.
That's true.
Right. Yeah.
Yes. All right, so we're pulling up the other image, and this is illustration of the city of our corridors that staff provided the commission during the last few months that shows where there are parcels of land that, and we have it in different gradations of depth, and if possible, I'd like you to zoom in so we're not looking at the amoeba shape of Austin. Let's get to a corridor.
Point of information, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
I believe we passed an amendment at a prior section allowing corridor properties that are zoned on, that are shallow, that have an RM property on the backside to jointly develop both parcels with parking, thus eliminating many of the barriers that shallow lots impose.
That would be for all the times in Austin. I'm not going to argue it. Never mind. Yes, that's true. All right, if you could say, let's go to one of our favorite corridor children here. Go to Burnett. And if you need help, we can point the way. All right, that works. All right, so I'm seeing at the top of, almost at the top of the page. top of the page was Anderson and North Cross Mall intersection with Burnett. It's a large blob of blue. Yep. So Burnett's roughly in the center of the screen. Lamar, a little bit to the center right. So you're seeing almost dead in the middle of the screen is the former the drive-in track that became storage, projecting right in basically, the middle of the screen. But what you're witnessing here is for the most of the corridors, that blue, you have it at Highland Mall down in a little bit more to the lower right at the intersection of I-35 and 290, 2222. You've got some other parcels along the highway frontage of Research, and on the west side of Lamar, and then you've got North Cross Mall. But it's not like the map is dominated predominantly by the deeper parcels. They are mostly the shallower parcels that really the compatibility impact wouldn't even be there because the natural state of the zoning on that site would be in place, and that's where the corridor conversation within both the mapping group as well as the compatibility discussion was centered around. So do we have questions on this image? Okay, so one more in favor, one more against, and decide whether or not we're going to table this item.
I have a question of staff.
Go for it.
So I had heard voiced previously concerns that a 25-foot side setback might limit development of smaller width lots. Could you speak to that? Because I know the current code does have it differentiates between less than 75 feet and greater than 75 feet.
That is correct. What we have, and I'm just looking at a MS 2B, and right now on lots that are 75 feet wide or greater, it would, well, actually 75 feet greater, it's 20 feet, and then if it's less than or equal to 75 feet, it's 15. So when you start suggesting 25, and you're coming in from both sides, then you're only leaving on a lot that's 75 feet wide, only 25-foot room to build. So it is, I think it's rather restrictive on that.
Okay. One more in opposition to the substitute motion. I'm going to get Commissioner Anderson up to speed real quick on what the motion currently is on the table. So, Commissioner Anderson, we have a substitute motion on the table related to compatibility. The substitute motion is taking, and if you could go back to Commissioner Shaw's graphic so he can see where we're at, and that was showing the stepping of the buildings. Well, while he's setting that up, we've had two people speak in favor, two people speak against, of a substitute motion that would adjust the compatibility setback form in the first, and so we're looking at the bottom of the page. It would alter it so that between 25 and 50 feet, it would be bumped from 25 feet up to 32 feet, in tune with being no more impactful than no more restrictive than what an adjacent residence would have, and then moving again. This is the bottom image. At 150 feet away, it would go up to 85 feet, not 65 feet. So 20 additional feet there. And no other changes to it in the first 300 feet. It would not be subject to it outside of 300 feet, and this would be for not just adjacent parcels. This is for all parcels. So you don't have to be it's not about a triggering part. It's not about triggering property that's making this happen. It's just if it's near you, it doesn't have to be adjacent to you. If that made sense. So with that, do you have any questions, Commissioner Anderson, getting up to speed, or speak in opposition or in favor?
Sure, and will there be an opportunity for more amendments?
We can take up amendments absolutely to this.
Okay.
It is on the table, so we'd have to vote on the amendments. The intent also is when I first started this conversation, is that we would probably table this so we could get through the bulk of the conversation, then start talking about mapping so we can know and about RM, R4, are they triggers or not? Because that's in our motions as well. And once we're in the mapping, then we have a better understanding of what the zoning predominantly is along the edges of certain portions of the corridors, and then we can finish the compatibility conversation. But if this body is determined to pass it at this time, then we could do that too. So before I'll let you finish your thinking, Commissioner White. So you had a neutral.
I had a neutral, but right now I would like to. I got distracted because I was trying to pull up that thing,
okay.
and I wasn't aware that adjacency had been pulled into this motion, into the substitute motion.
Well, it's you don't have to be the adjacent parcel to trigger. That's where it's at.
Right. I think in the original motion we just didn't address adjacency, so I would ask to divide the question of adjacency from
should the adjacent parcel be the trigger, or should it be anywhere as a separate question?
As a separate question.
Okay, so we have a motion to divide the question of the triggering point from the rest of the form. Is there a second to that motion? Second by Commissioner Anderson. Let's take up this portion of it then now. You speak in favor of that, or
of separating?
Well, no, not of well, no, we need to vote. Sorry, we need to vote to separate it. We don't have to go. Let's not go through that. All those in favoring of dividing the question, please say aye. Those opposed, abstaining. Okay, so that do we have a full house now? Yes, we do. Okay, so that passes 12-01.
Chair?
Yes.
As this is a really, really big deal and we're about to talk mapping, can I go ahead and offer up the idea of tabling this item for now, and let's take it up later tonight?
You absolutely can. Is there a second to the offer table? Second by Commissioner Hart. All those in favor of tabling this item, considering you weren't here when I was talking about the strategy of the evening, can I offer that we take it up when we get to take it up again, and maybe we table it again when we get to Main Street. We get to Main Street zoning.
That makes sense. Yes.
Okay. All right. All those in favor of tabling this until Main Street zoning.
Sorry, because we're postponing it to Main Street, will that still give us an opportunity during the R4 and RM conversation to talk about whether they trigger or not?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
We may decide that it needs to table again because of that. But I'm just trying to offer a point in the conversation.
Right. But the point that you've offered is beyond that, so I just want to
we
make sure.
we take up Main Street before we take up RM R4.
Oh.
Let's go from most intense to least intense this evening with the mapping. Okay, all those in favor of tabling, please say aye. Those opposed? Abstaining? All right, so that passes unanimously. Thank you. All right. And thank you for everybody for putting up with our lack of action to this point.